Hello everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Red Shoes. This film came out in 1948 and it was written and directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. They were collectively known as the Archers. These guys to me completely set the standard for artistry in their time. When you watch their films, there's just this very lush, very sumptuous, sensual quality to them. It's as if like Monet and Renoir both decided to become film directors. It has a really ethereal kind of fantasy quality, and they frequently collaborated with Jack Cardiff, who was, of course, the amazing cinematographer of his day, to create a lot of these very dreamlike effects. They stood out from everyone else. To me, they inspire on a very different level than a lot of directors were at the time. They were pushing themselves creatively. And just for me, when I was younger, especially in college, films that they did really caught my attention, like Black Narcissus and Tales of Hoffman, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and so on. But The Red Shoes might be their most famous work of all, and it really struck a nerve with a lot of cinephiles, people that just really appreciate art and cinema, and also a lot of great film directors. You look at somebody like Martin Scorsese, this is one of the films that inspired him the most, one of his favorite films, I believe, and he put a lot of money into getting it remastered for the modern day. And I agree with him. You know, for me, the film did the same thing. It's just one of those movies when people ask me, what are the movies that inspired you the most? This one is definitely up there. It sort of reinvigorated my passion for cinema, but not just cinema, for all kinds of things, for art and music and dance and painting. This film is about a ballet company, and it focuses on three main characters. You have Vicky, the ballet dancer, you have Julian, who is the composer, and you also have the impresario of the company, Boris Lermontov. Vicky really wants to be a great dancer, and Lermontov wants her to become a great dancer, and he wants to really help her take the steps to get there. And the two of them are very similar in the sense that they're both obsessive when it comes to the creative process. They have great respect for all of that dedication. But of course, Vicky ends up falling in love with Julian, the composer at the ballet company, and Lermontov does not like that. He thinks that in order to be great at anything, you have to push yourself to the limits, and that you can't let distractions like love and anything like human emotions get in the way. You have to detach yourself from what he perceives as weakness. So Vicky's very torn here. She's torn between the idea of having a life outside of the ballet, one that does make her very happy, but she's also, of course, very dedicated. She has all of this drive to be the greatest at what she does. So this is very much a story about art as a destructive yet very compelling device, and this is something, of course, that we've seen many, many times over. But this one is especially poetic for me, not only because it is one of the most beautiful films I have ever seen, but also because of how the creators themselves, the film creators, are also very aware. It's like they recognize that they too are driven, just like the main characters are, to create something of beauty, and that takes a lot of sacrifice. They are conscious of a lot of the romanticism that they are painting, that they are creating the mood for the film, and how that can also contribute to their own destructive nature. One of the things that makes the dichotomy between the romanticism of art and also the pain and the grit that goes into creating the art is how they tell the story. The story goes back and forth between having a kind of a backstage story. So you see a lot of the minutia, a lot of the routine of practicing and this and that, all the kind of the things that aren't normally shown. But it's also, of course, a melodrama with a lot of fantasy, surrealistic elements as well. It paints a whole picture, and so in a way you feel like you are pulled in two different directions. Even though Vicky, though, is the person who's meant to be in the middle of the story, she's in the middle of this triangle, and she's torn, of course, between her desire for art and the desire to have a personal life. But for me, and I think a lot of people can agree with me who've seen the film, this is Lermontov's story, and I think he's the one who's truly struggling with his motives and his decisions. Lermontov is one of my favorite characters ever, and this is also one of my favorite performances, actually. This is by Anton Walbrook, and he's extraordinary in this part. I can't imagine anyone else playing it, because he brings so much more to the character than what is on the page. He makes him so complex. And I could talk about this dude all day long because there are so many little moments that you could look at and ponder, what does he really mean by that? So many nuances that speak volumes about who he is, yet at the same time, he is so enigmatic. We know nothing about this character. We know nothing about his background. He's really just an archetype. But again, it's the performance that infuses so much into it, and I love that. But that archetype is really beautifully drawn, I'd say. He is a paradox like most humans are. He's really charismatic. When he walks into a room, he just commands attention from every single person. Yet if you look closer at him, he's very uncomfortable. I say he's tyrannical, definitely, but he's also insecure as fuck. And I think you see it because even in just the way he looks and like the way he dresses and how, he wears these sunglasses a lot of the time because, that usually means you're trying to hide something. You're concealing your expression, your emotions, your eyes. And when you do see close-ups of his expression, when you do see his eyes, they are very sad when you look at them. This is a person who has really been hurt. He's very lonely, but again, we don't know the extent of it because we know nothing about his personal life. A lot of people have speculated about it, but ultimately we're never going to know. It's interesting because he is an impossible man, yet there's something about him where I feel like if I was at this ballet, I would want to please him as well. When the first ballerina announces that she's getting married, he gets so upset. I mean, he basically drops her from the company because he thinks that, as I said before, that you can't have it both ways. He thinks she needs to ignore those human impulses when she's not willing to, and he feels betrayed, as though she's betraying him in a way. And it's at that point where he starts to really get the idea for the Red Shoes Ballet. He really decides, I'm going to start to put this in motion, and so we can really make this into something. And I think that's a very important transition to remember that he decides this right after she decides that she wants to get married. Because, the Red Shoes Ballet is, of course, it takes all of the themes of the film and encompasses it all into one piece. I think the relationship between Vicky and Lermontov is quite complex in terms of subtext because he sees a lot of himself in her and he is jealous of her. And he even says that he is. I think he's just jealous of what she's capable of and what she could become. And I do think, though, that there is a moment where you do see a shred of humanity in him. And it's actually right before the Red Shoes Ballet takes place, where Vicky's really nervous because this is her first starring performance with the company and she's real anxious, and he's trying to calm her down. He's saying, look, you've done this many times, it's all going to be fine. He says she's going to be great. And then there's this moment where he's looking at her and I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's like he wants to say something, but he stops himself and he just kind of looks away and goes, good luck, my dear, and just walks away. And that, I always thought that was a really interesting moment. This is a man who's just incapable of connecting. He has maybe a cynicism about him. And I find that to be really tragic. He's a sad character to me, but also just endlessly compelling. But I do have to talk about that 15-minute ballet sequence that is right in the middle of the film. It is extraordinary. I think it broke ground on all kinds of levels and inspired a lot of people after that. Gene Kelly was very inspired by this, and that kind of led him to start making those very ambitious ballet sequences like what you see in like An American in Paris and Singing in the Rain. But this sequence in particular is the most breathtaking dance sequence I've ever seen. It has everything you could possibly want. It has music by Brian Eastdale, which, he collaborated with the Archers quite often, and it's hypnotic. It mixes more kind of romantic, kind of traditional classical style of music, but it also has a lot of dissonance, and it's very 20th century modern as well. And the ballet itself is very surrealistic. It feels like a dream, like it doesn't belong in just one period. The Archers use a lot of special effects in this sequence, and for 1948, there were no computers, obviously. They had to be really creative, and they had to really try to make things believable by thinking outside the box as to how are they going to do a lot of it. And I think it's remarkable what they achieved. And the look of the ballet also has that feel of being like different styles are clashing. Like it entices you with that impressionistic, very lush beauty, but it's also quite terrifying at times. It's kind of contrasted with this like very sharp, expressionistic style. It's something like you would see maybe in like a German silent horror film. And I think that reflects obviously the terror and the struggle of the artists as they're spiraling out of control. They are being drawn into that darkness. There's even kind of like a psychedelic, like a sexual quality to it. I mean, even with like the red shoes, the color red is a color that can symbolize lust, but it can also symbolize blood, like a kind of gore. And plus, I mean, this is a ballet that is about a girl who, when she puts on the red shoes, it's in a way she's becoming mature. She's awakened and she's starting to live a very decadent lifestyle. But all of these things, the sexuality, the horror, the beauty, etc., they're all merging together, and that raises the stakes of the actual story. If you just look at the story outside of the story, I know it's kind of confusing, but I mean, it makes sense when you're watching it. But that's really where the ballet is merging with reality, or the reality of the story. But this ballet feels right on the edge, and there are certain metaphors here and there that I don't particularly like. There's one where you see Julian composing, and then he walks onto stage and becomes the male ballet dancer, and little things like that I feel like are a little over the top, a little bit too heavy-handed. But I think overall it's such a key part of the story, because it is the key to understanding Vicky as she's surrendering to that destruction. And as I said, the filmmakers themselves are kind of with Vicky in the sense that they are pushing their own emotions to feel that ecstasy of revelation, of creation. And that makes the characters and the film, of course, come alive, but at a price. And that's why this film, to me, is such a great one that stands out beyond the beauty and beyond just the aesthetic of it. It's ambitious and it's influential, and it is a special work for me because a lot of those themes have really resonated in my life. Every cinephile needs to see a lot of the Powell and Pressburger films, but I think this is a really good one to start with if you're not, if you're not an expert on them, because this is spectacular. And also, of course, one of my favorite films. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you want to check out my social media information, it's below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you want. Catch you next time.